Thank you for joining us today as Sebastian and myself look into the question of should you rent or should you buy? We're going to first look at some expert opinions on the topic, some of the pros and cons with buying and renting. Take a look at a 5-year detailed net worth scenario examples if you chose to rent versus if you bought. Look at a quick hack referred to as the 5% rule, which can be useful as you go through this process, and then just some closing thoughts. So, what are some of the expert opinions? Well, it depends. There really is no right answer in the rent or buy debate. It's a question, and it depends on a bunch of factors, which we'll look more at, which are both financial or quantitative, as well as lifestyle or qualitative related. So, there's a bunch of different factors. It's different for everyone. There is no right answer. I know that's not what you want to hear, but we'll take a look at that. So, at the top there, the rent versus buy seems like it's been a constant question of this generation where homes have been priced out of the reach for most, so it's had to be a question. Whereas for prior generation, the goal was always to buy the home. On the left-hand side, it can be incredibly stressful as well being a renter. One of the benefits of renting is the idea that you'll have extra cash to invest and grow your wealth if you don't own a home. However, if rents are so high that you can't even afford to save, then you're sort of defeating that purpose, and you may need to either make more money, which is not always easy, or find a lower rent, which may lead you somewhere you don't want to be. On the right-hand side is the question: is it better to buy or rent? Well, according to this study, 91% of the cases show that buying a home is more beneficial. Now, while I am more slanted to that buying is more beneficial if you can financially handle it, the one caveat: that study was done by a real estate company, so take it with a grain of salt. And here at the bottom is sort of a bit more nuanced article from Money Sense. Is it time to buy a home or should I continue renting? So as it sort of mentions there in its title, some of the qualitative factors is: do you see yourself being there? Is this where you want to live for the future? What's your ability to handle all the payments associated with owning? How about different locations that might have a better value but further from work? And what's your longer term plan?
So here is a bit of the pros and cons for buying and renting that is important to know. And depending on what's important to you, renting may be better than buying or vice versa. So if I look at the renting pros, obviously there's less maintenance and repairs if you rent. There are lower monthly and upfront costs. It's a shorter term commitment, making it easier to move to a new home, neighborhood, or city if you need to. It protects you from a decrease in property value and has the possibility to free up some cash to invest or to save a larger down payment for a home in the future. On the flip side, though, monthly payments may increase year after year. You may have a risk that your lease won't be renewed, whether the landlord wants to live in the property or sell to someone who wants to live in the property. You're paying someone else's mortgage rather than building equity of your own. And you can't really paint or remodel without the landlord's permission. If you look at the buying pros and cons now, on one side, you have the freedom to renovate and modify your home as you see fit. You're building up equity in a safe, secure investment as you pay down your mortgage. You have potential for rental income if you include a secondary suite. And the stability and peace of mind that comes from being in control of your investment and owning the place where you live. On the flip side, the risk of financial loss if your home has lost value when you sell. You have responsibility for all ongoing costs, including mortgage principal and interest, property taxes, insurance, and maintenance. Monthly payment can increase significantly if interest rates go up at renewal time. And the possibility of unexpected and potentially costly repairs. So there's always, on each rent versus buy, there's always pros and cons, and depending where you are in your life at this time, what your plans are, as Jeff mentioned, in the next 5 years, 10 years, you may have some of those aspects that are making you think more on the buying side versus the renting side, or vice versa. Now, if you purely look at numbers showing how one can build up their net worth either by renting or buying, the answer is that buying very often wins in the long term. and sometimes even in the short term in terms of net worth growth. So let me show you how and why. This table looks at a 5-year net worth buildup for a tenant or a condo owner for the same condo. So in this example, this is a 1-bedroom condo worth $600,000 with $500 monthly condo fees and $1,800 annual property taxes in North York. The owner put the minimum down payment, just over 5%, which was $35,000, and has a fixed rate mortgage of 2.7% for 5 years. The same condo was rented for $1,900 a month, and the cash flow difference was wisely invested by the renter with a 5% after-tax annual return. So in this example, very conservative home appreciation numbers were used, 2% in this case, instead of the current double digits unsustainable growth you can see. And so as not to bias the homeownership side of the picture. On the flip side, very liberal investments returns were used for the renter, which is 5% year-over-year net returns after tax. So even with this assumption, it only takes 3 years for the new homeowner to be ahead of their net worth corresponding to a renter. And that you can see that at the end of year 3 and year 4 in the boxes in green, where the net worth has really taken over compared to renting. Now, to show you that this is really the worst case scenario, and that if the annual property appreciation was set to 3%, for example, instead of 3% instead of 2%, which is a lot closer to what has been seen in the GTA in regular years. And even if we were to increase the rate of return for a renter to 6%, a buyer would still be better off buying, and in this case, it would finish 1 year earlier, which means at the end of year 2, the net worth of the buyer would be higher than the net worth of the renter. So the reason this is the case is that buying real estate has the most leverage, is the most leveraged investment that anyone can do. No other investment, you could pay 5% of the price of the investment and get the appreciation of 100% of it. And this is the reason a renter will never be able, in the long term, to beat a buyer, because all they're working with is their 5% capital and the additional monthly savings that took place in comparison to the other buyer that has 95% that's being leveraged. So if there's one key point to remember here from this presentation on my side, is that the home buyer gets to keep the appreciation of the 95% of the equity that he doesn't own, which is key here, and it's an unfair advantage compared to a renter.
Thank you, Sebastian, for that detailed look at the net worth of an individual. What I'm going to look at here, something in the buyer rent question, is something called the 5% rule. It's a bit of an oversimplification, and it was developed by Canadian portfolio manager Ben Felix. So it's useful in helping with this decision, but like most hacks, it's an oversimplification that can lead to being misused. So just to note, it's a very, very rough way to make the decision, and it compares the unrecoverable cost of renting versus the unrecoverable cost of owning. So unrecoverable just refers to sunk costs that you don't ever get back. So a few of the assumptions in this rule is: 1, the stock market increases faster than home prices, about 3% higher a year, which Sebastian incorporated in his slides. The second assumption is you will wisely invest the extra money that you don't use to buy a home. You won't just go on vacations, buy extra nice things, but you'll actually invest it. The main unrecoverable parts of home ownership cost is roughly 5% based on the property tax at 1, maintenance at 1, and mortgage interest is 3. Now again, these are just rough figures because this is a very rough guideline, right? It's not meant to be exact like the details Sebastian did. The unrecoverable cost of renting, on the other hand, is simply just the monthly rental cost. You don't pay the property tax, you don't pay the maintenance fees, condo fees, and you don't pay the mortgage. So the general rule here is, so the ownership cost, you take your ownership cost per month, multiply it by the 5% and divide it by 12, and that'll give you the ownership cost per month. So that's how you calculate it. And the idea is, if your monthly rent is less than the ownership cost per month, then you should continue renting. There's not a lot of harm lost if you continue renting. And this idea of, it's become popular in the last few years, the renting over buying, not just because home prices have been crazy, but just because a lot of people can't afford to rent. So how do you gain financial independence if you don't own a home? And there's something called the FIRE movement, Financial Independence Retire Early. It's very popular now, part of the millennial movement. And, a significant portion of this relates to the idea of the renting and not buying, and this sort of idea, hey, I can save more now, build more of my worth now, have more freedom by renting over buying. So again, like everything mentioned, it has its pros and cons, and this is a bit of oversimplification, but I'm going to take a look at an example now of this rule. So let's say we had a 5% rule, and let's say we took the same $600,000 property that we were going to buy. The average cost per month would be $600,000 times 5% divided by 12, which gives us an ownership cost of $2,500 per month. So based on the 5% rule, if you can rent for under $2,500, then there's no harm in continue renting and invest the saving wisely. However, if the rent will cost you above $2,500, then it definitely makes more sense to buy. So that's, again, I'm roughly showing you a rough rule, which is an oversimplification of the more detailed scenario Sebastian walked through. But again, it is sort of useful in, hey, right now, should I buy, should I rent? Again, another question is always, can you even afford to buy based on your debt and your other life situation, security of your job, stability of where you're going to live? There's a bunch of other questions, but if you can, should you? And for that perspective, I think a 3% rule might be better. So if you can afford to buy, I think a 3% rule might be better rule of thumb. And I just find it more realistic based on the real world cases I've seen because one, most people I know won't put 100% of their savings into investment. Secondly, home ownership, as already mentioned, allows you to leverage your growth and it forces you to save. And again, the idea of leveraging may be new to some of you, but again, it's as Sebastian pointed out, leveraging means if you don't buy the house, let's say you have your down payment of 5 to 20% that you can invest, and you can have your monthly savings you invest. Whereas with the mortgage you're buying a mortgage for the whole $600,000. So in essence, you get to invest the whole $600,000 mortgage as opposed to just the $50,000 down payment plus any monthly rental savings. So that's the idea of leveraging why you're better off longer term in home ownership if you can afford to. The last point there about why I think a 3% rule is better is because even if the rent is lower right now in this point in time, what we've seen is because the mortgage leveraging, it allows a break-even point typically 2 to 3 years out, as per the earlier, more detailed example by Seth. So what I would do is use a 3% rule. So basically, if the ownership cost per month, so take the $600,000 times 3%, divide that by 12, gives you $1,500 a month would be the max rent you should pay. So at this point, you will have significant savings, I guess, to make it more worthwhile and take a look at some of the other factors you lose without leveraging. But again, and basically in North York, you generally can't find a one-bedroom condo for under $1,800. So again, this is just more pointing out, hey, in somewhere like North York, where even the cheap one bedroom is going to be $1,800, $1,900 is more realistic. But the point is, it's very hard to show that financially renting is better than buying if you can afford to buy. Again, if you can afford to buy and you do want to save up and do believe in the FIRE movement and want to retire early, then you really have to find a rent somewhere. So based on an apartment, a room in a house that puts you under that $1,500 level in essence. So you really can save more. And then when you have the savings and more independence, you can decide to buy, you can decide to travel, you have more decisions. The point is finding the best way to get you there. So again, hopefully that made sense. So again, Sebastian's was the more detailed. Mine, I just want to touch on an oversimplification or a 5%, a quick 3%, a 5% rule you can use to make that decision for yourself. Again, if any questions at any time, please do. Feel free to ask. So just some other closing thoughts. As we tried to point out, there is no wrong or right choice. So financially, one may be better longer term than others in terms of net worth. But again, buying versus renting is a personal decision that depends on a number of factors, both financial, quantitative, and qualitative and lifestyle related. So hopefully we want to continue making content that's valuable for you. So any feedback or things, please do let us know. And again, please do post a comment, reach out to us directly with any questions. And if you found this interesting or useful, please do click the like button and please do click subscribe, as we hope to put out more information for you and answer any questions.